about 30 a.m., 30 minutes after the hour. So I'll kindly ask that you put on your camera in about 25 minutes. So if you need to get dressed or you need to, set yourself for the picture, you can do that before the time. Yeah, so without waste of time, I would want us to just jump right in. And I want to say thank you again for making the time to join us, because at this point, Africa is at the critical time where it's journeying through the energy transition phase in the midst of energy poverty, from green hydrogen in places like South Africa to the just energy transition partnerships in Senegal. It's definitely something Africa wants to push forward at COP28. And it's important that as journalists on the continent, we're able to have information on this issue, on this topic, so that when we go to COP, we'll be able to report effectively. So joining us today for this conversation is, we have Chima Moneke, who is the co-founder and lead consultant at Schematic Blue Energy. We also have Mercy Rose, who is the Energy for Impact program lead at Mexico. And we also have Samuel Ajala, who is an energy and climate journalist with experience reporting for platforms like Energy Windy and Gas Outlook. So we're going to have our first presentation from Chima Moneke, the co-founder and lead consultant at Schematic Blue Energy. Please, Mr. Chima, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. It's nice to be here with every one of you. Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Just a moment, let me start share my screen.
Okay. Okay, while we wait.
Can everyone see my screen? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see that now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. It's good to have every one of you here in this conversation. The issue of climate change and energy transition is an issue that is dear to me. And of course, I believe it's also dear to every one of us, for us to have, be part of this discussion. So I believe it is dear to every one of us. So without wasting much time, I need to jump into this because I'm told I have only 20 minutes to do this. And I have a lot I want to share. So this is just about me. As already stated, I'm the co-founder and lead energy consultant at Schematic Blue Energy. I'm a certified energy manager as well as a certified energy auditor. I have a background in chemical engineering with more than 10 years of professional experience in energy consulting. So in this presentation, I will be talking us through energy, economy, and environment, and then we'll talk about global warming and climate change. And then we'll talk about climate disaster around Africa, the need and the goal of energy transition. We'll talk about the Paris Agreement, and then African NDCs. We talk about energy mix in Africa, the need for just energy transition, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so we have a lot to discuss, just 20 minutes. I hope I will be able to do justice to this. Okay, so let's start right away from the energy, economy, and environment. We all know that energy is the lifeblood of every economy. I mean, without energy, there is nothing like economic development. Okay, so however, the way and manner through which we produce and consume this energy has posed an existential threat to humanity due to the impact of global warming and climate change. Global warming and climate change are related, but not exactly the same thing. Global warming leads to climate change. So how does this happen? What's all of this buzz around energy and climate change? So let's take a dive into history, how energy gets to us and what we do with energy. So primarily, energy originates from the sun, primarily. And in our basic science, we are told that green plants, through photosynthesis, they use sunlight in the presence of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, and they form glucose, which is the food that we eat in plants.
Sorry, Chima. Some people are complaining in the chat that they can't hear you. I don't know what the problem is.
Sorry. Please, has it improved now? Maybe the mic was away from mine.
Can they please check if it's from their end?
But you yourself, Vivian, can you hear me very well?
I can hear you, but I don't want anybody to miss out.
No, yeah, I understand. Just to confirm that it's not from my end. If you can hear me very well, they might have to just check their connections. I'm trying to push the mic closer to my mouth just to improve the situation.
Or I think it's clear from other people's end, so you can just continue.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you very much. If at any point anyone couldn't hear me, please notify us so that we can see what the problem is. So
All
back to
right.
the presentation, the primary source of energy, it's from the sun, and through the process of photosynthesis, it gets converted into food that we eat as human beings. Both plants, both human beings and animal, primarily feed from from plants, and of course, we all know that we breathe out carbon dioxide, and through the process of photosynthesis, plants also absorb this carbon dioxide. So there is a kind of a balance in nature, right? Now, at the end of our lifetime, be it the plant, human beings, or animal, at the end of our lifetime on Earth, we all go back to the Mother Earth. We are being committed to the Mother Earth by the process of burial. And over millions of years, our body decompose and become crude or gas or hydrocarbon or what we call fossil fuel. All right. So before industrialization, human beings, because of limited knowledge, they needed energy to catalyze development. They needed energy to achieve the kind of economic development that they needed to do. And because of the limited knowledge, they went back and began to explore this crude oil. They started bringing it back to the earth, okay, to fuel our economic development. And that's where the problem began. Okay, so if you see this, you will not notice that there is an offset in the balance of nature, because by nature, human beings breathe out carbon dioxide, and the plants, using this carbon dioxide to give us food. But human beings, through industrialization, we have now bring back this crude oil or gas that has been stored under the earth and bringing it back to the surface of the earth, and then burning this crude oil to generate electricity or other forms of economic activity, or to power other forms of economic activity. And in the end, this crude oil ends up in the form of heat, making it difficult for human beings, or rather increasing the temperature of the earth, right? So in the process of the burn, I'm sorry, this might be a little bit scientific, but it is good that we understand this scientific background to enable us appreciate the reason why we need to do this energy transition, and at the point where we need to begin to implement energy transition. Okay. So what I'm trying to establish here is to establish the offset in the economy, in the
Okay.
natural balance. Someone saying anything? Okay, I just take that's a mistake. So now, because of the industrialization,
Yes. Are your slides moving?
yes, my slide is moving. It's not moving from your end?
I mean your slides. It's no. I don't know
It's
if
not
it's
moving
just
from your
me or
end?
everyone else on the call.
On what slide are you? Are you still on the
It's just
cover
been on the
page?
first page, so I just wanted to be sure your system.
Oh my goodness, why is this?
It's not moving. If you can put them on a presentation mode, that thing
Your
there at the
slide
bottom that
moving
looks like.
here.
I had this on a presentation mode. Just a moment, let me, I stopped sharing, but I'm going to start the sharing again to see if this gets corrected.
Okay.
Okay, maybe I should just share the entire screen and instead, let's see how this works. So I'm sharing my entire screen now. Can everyone see that? Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes. Not
I'm at the
yet.
point where I have the global warming and climate change. You can see
Yeah, we
that,
can
right?
see it now.
Oh, my apologies. I didn't know this wasn't moving. So this is an illustration I was trying to use to depict the reason why we have the urge to transition from the previous form of energy that we have, which is still being used today. And I said that the primary source of energy is from the sun, and from the sun, it gets down to us in the form of food through photosynthesis. Okay, and human beings, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and the plant absorbs this carbon dioxide. Okay, and in the end of our lifetime, everyone is committed to the Mother Earth. Okay, but because of industrialization, the need for energy to create economic opportunities. And because of the lack of limited knowledge, human beings have to now explore back this energy that has gone underneath the earth. We have to bring it back to earth, and we begin to combust, we begin to burn this fuel to generate electricity and to power our economic activities. And in the end, this fossil fuel ends up in the form of heat and carbon dioxide, therefore offsetting the balance of nature. Okay, this was the original balance of nature, where human beings feed from plants, and then the carbon dioxide we breathe out is also absorbed by the plant. But because of this economic activity now that we now introduce, to create jobs, industrialization, and all of that, we now introduce excess CO2 into the environment, so much so that the plants are not able to absorb them. And the CO2 also depletes the ozone layer, making excess radiation come to the earth. In all of this, the earth becomes warmer, and it's getting to a point where it can become unbearable for human beings. And it creates some natural disasters on earth. Okay, because of the offset in this balance. Of course, when you offset a balance in nature, the nature will react, and that's what is happening. Okay, so this is the reason why we need to, we need to transition from using fossil fuel to a new technology, which is the renewable energy. I need to move faster now because the time is fast spent. So now, because of that activity, because of those economic development that we have now begin to, exploit using fossil fuel-based energy systems, it has now created some economic disaster or natural disasters, and Africa is not spared in this disaster. So around Africa, we have so far recorded 1,839 disasters. Somebody's mic is on. Vidya, can you please mute everyone so that we can have a cordial conversation? Okay, so far we've had 1,839 economic disasters around Africa alone, and this is data source from the United Nations World Meteorological Organization. And these disasters has resulted into 733,585 deaths. Now, most of these deaths, or rather 95% of these deaths, are from droughts. Maybe in the country where I come from, in Nigeria, what we experience more is flood. But in some other places, Somalia, Sudan, there has been high level of droughts leading to large number of people dying, even animals also dying. And as a result of all of this, there are economic consequences. Over $40 billion has been lost in all of these economic climate disasters around Africa. Okay, so but the thing is, so now this is how this thing spread across Africa. Now this is climate change, how it amplifies instability in Africa. Okay, around the Sahel region, to the Sudan, to the Congo Basin, to the Gulf of Guinea, and the infrastructural destruction in Mozambique. All of these are economic destructions in Africa. I will just move ahead because of time. So now, let's talk about the need for energy transition. I have laid the foundation, the basis, how we got to where we are today because of limited knowledge. But the good news is that through science and technology, it has become possible to produce and consume energy in an economically sustainable and environmentally friendly way, which is the use of renewable energy. So the energy transition is simply shifting from fossil fuel-based energy production to renewable energy technologies. Before now, we are used to the fossil fuel-based, but thank God for science and technology, we now have a new way of doing this without, offsetting the balance in nature. So it has made energy transition inevitable, and there is no room for fossil fuel in our future. Down the line in our future, even including Africa, there is no room for fossil fuel. The question is, how do we move from fossil fuel based to renewable energy technology? And that is all about the energy transition. How do we make this transition? And ignoring this core is living in denial, and the denial will come to haunt us even more. So it is inevitable. We need to transition. So what has the world done? Now, this is just not Africa. What has the world done, to enable countries around the world to make this transition? So the first major binding agreement that has been taken so far is the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement is a legal international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties or 196 countries at the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris, held in France, 2015. It is an overarching goal. Its overarching goal is to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade, above pre-industrial level. Now, the whole idea is to make sure that they limit the global rise in temperature below 2 degrees centigrade. In fact, the effort is to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 above pre-industrial level. At first, the general goal is to make sure it doesn't, we want to limit to below 2 degrees, but below 2 degrees, we even don't want it to exceed 1.5 degrees. So the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change indicate that crossing 1.5 degree threshold risk unleashing far more severe climate change impact, including more frequent and severe droughts, heat waves, and rainfall. In Europe, in the southern Europe, as we speak today, they're experiencing the hottest weather in the history or in their lifetime. Okay, and all of these are the consequences of climate change, and we need to act now. So since 2020, countries have been submitting their national climate action plans, known as the nationally determined contribution. This used to be an intended nationally determined contribution, but after they have rectified it, it now become nationally determined contribution. So each successive NDC is meant to reflect an increasingly higher degree of ambition compared to the previous version. So in the NDC, so in the NDC, countries commit actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gases. Now, carbon dioxide is a type of a greenhouse gas. So there are other forms of greenhouse gas, but chief among them is carbon dioxide, which is a product of burning or combustion of fossil fuel. Okay, so the goal is to reduce the greenhouse gas emitted by these countries in order to reach the goal of the Paris Agreement, which is to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 above industrial level, above pre-industrial level. So how has African country committed to this Paris Agreement? Now, it is worthy of note that Africa is solely responsible for about 3.8% of global greenhouse gas emission. Just 3.5%, not even up entire Africa. One country, for example, US is above 20%, if I'm not mistaken, but the entire Africa is not even up to 5%. But we are also suffering in the impacts, in the consequences. So consequently, most African NDCs set low unconditional reduction commitments and relatively stronger commitment based on the aid of developed countries, historically responsible for the greenhouse gas emission. Now, some countries in Africa say, look, you committed this, you brought us to this calamity, and you want us to clean it up. That they cannot do anything unless the developed countries provide aid or provide funding for them to do that. Okay, and some people said, okay, we are going to achieve some level of greenhouse gas reduction on our own, but if you provide us with support, we are going to even do more. And some say we don't need your support, we can achieve certain level of reduction. So these are three categories of people. The first is countries with unconditional commitment. Unconditional commitment, meaning that we don't need your support. We can on our own achieve this reduction. And those are the countries that are labeled in yellow. So you can see Kenya, South Africa, and some other countries are part of those. And you have countries that have said, look, we are only going to achieve some reduction conditionally, only when you give us aid, only when you provide us with funding. That's the only way we can achieve some reduction. And these countries are the countries in blue. And there are other countries that have said, okay, we will do both. On our own, we are going to achieve this amount of reduction, but if you give us support, we'll even do more. And those are the countries that are in green. Okay, and that's where Nigeria falls into. So these are the three levels of commitments. So Libya is the only country in Africa who has not submitted an NDC. Beyond Libya, every other country has submitted either unconditional, conditional, or both. So where are we in the energy mix? How far have we integrated? How far have we, embraced renewable technology in Africa? So 22 countries in Africa already utilize renewable energy as the main source of electricity. Okay. And 8 African countries generate over 90% of their electricity from renewable sources. Central African Republic has 96.3. Congo has 98. Eswatini has 99. Ethiopia has 100%. Now, when we talk about this percentage, it is expected. In fact, we mean the contribution to their national grid. Okay, I'm well aware that a lot of people and still does not have access to the grid or access to energy in most of these countries. So when we talk about this percentage, we are talking about the contribution to their national grid. So 8 African countries has achieved more than 90%. Okay. Now some African countries are even leading the way in renewable energy. So for example, in Namibia, almost 1/5 of their electricity is generated through solar. It is the fourth highest share globally. In Kenya, geothermal energy accounts for almost half of electricity generation, more than any other country in the world. Now, this is for the record. Kenya is doing fantastically well in geothermal because that is their strength. Then 21 out of the 52 countries using hydropower as the primary source of electricity are in Africa. So when you look at this, it looks like we are doing very well, right? That's what it seems like. Okay, but it's very fantastic when you're moving from ground zero. When you're moving from ground zero, it's fantastic. Every little thing you do can translate into a larger effort. But here is the downside. Africa is still suffering. Okay, more than 80% of the people who does not have access to electricity are in Africa. More than 80% in the world are in Africa alone. So that's about 600 million people are still does not have access to electricity in Africa. And about 930 million still lack access to clean cooking. So in the midst of all of this landmark achievement, we are still suffering because we are moving from ground zero. We have not achieved economic development, or we are not economic power compared to the other developed countries. So we are still at ground zero when you talk about energy access and economic development, in the exception of few countries around Africa, maybe South Africa and some countries in the North Africa. So some of the problems that we've had so far is limited access to capital and financing options. We've also have the problem of insufficient transmission and distribution networks. So many people who are living in the rural communities does not have access to the grid because there is no sufficient transmission and distribution network. So when we are talking about some countries who have achieved up to 90% renewable energy, it does not account for some of these people. So you can see why I say we are still at ground zero. So every little effort seems that it's a lot. It is not really a lot compared to other countries in the Western world. So we also have inadequate policies, regulation, and market structure that has made it difficult for renewable energy to penetrate in Africa. So lack of skilled workforce and technical expertise is also another big challenge. But I'm not going to go into the details. The next presenter is going to talk about the challenges and opportunities. So I will leave that to her to talk about. But in all of these challenges has limited the energy transition in Africa. And that is where we'll now begin to talk about the just energy transition. Now, what's the meaning of the just energy transition? When you look at this picture here, you now begin to wonder, these people, they want economic empowerment. They want to survive. And you're talking to them about energy transition. They don't care about what energy transition is. What they care about survival. So first of all, they need to survive. So if we are talking about energy transition in Africa, it has to be balanced with economic empowerment and not just energy transition in isolation. And that is where just energy transition has to come in. Africa needs to be allowed to develop at their own pace. We must not be put on the same pedal with the Western world in terms of energy transition. We first of all need to have energy to live, to survive, before we can talk about transition. And that is the whole subject about just energy transition. So in conclusion, it is important to recognize that Africa is a diverse continent, and strategies for accelerating renewable energy will need to be tailored to each country's specific need and resources. Collaboration, political commitment, and long-term planning are essential for successful transitioning to Africa's clean and sustainable energy future. Thank you very much for listening. Vivian, to you.
Yes, I'm here. That was such a great presentation. Well done. I can see a lot of people clapping for you. Of course, collaboration, political commitment, and long-term planning are essential for successfully transitioning to Africa's clean and sustainable energy future. And so, thank you so much for letting us also know that Africa is starting from ground zero. I think that's one thing that journalists need to put into consideration when reporting, that we are at a point where we need to transition, but we still have a great mile to go. Thank you so much. All right, so right now it's already 10:30, and I would like us to just take a quick picture, a quick group picture before we go over to the next presentation. Please, can everyone put on their cameras? Let's see your beautiful faces. Dizan?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just waiting for more people to put on their videos.
All right.
Okay. Wow, we have such a nice full house today.
Yeah.
If you can't put on your camera, that's totally fine. All right, so I'm gonna take this shot and I'll take two versions. So I'll take the first one in on the count of 2. 1, 2. Smile. All right, let me just save that. 1. All right, so I'm gonna take another one now on the count of 2. Smile. Lovely. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. I want to also say thank you again to Chima Moneke. That was a very robust presentation. Now we're going to move over to Mercy Rose. Mercy Rose is the Energy Access Program lead at Mercy Corps, where she spearheads initiatives that focus on bringing field-based evidence and research to action through energy access programs in Africa. She has over 9 years in the energy and environment space, and she focuses on bringing sustainable interventions to underserved and unserved rural and urban communities in Africa. Mercy Rose, we're so happy to have you. Please take it away. Mercy, are you there?
You're muted.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Sorry, apologies for that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
fantastic. Yeah, so thank you so much, Vivian, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Chima, for really raising the curtains and setting the scene for us now. Vivian, I'm trying to share my screen, but it seems that I'm having some issues again. I apologize for that. Could someone please help with that?
It's fine. Dizan, please, could you put up her presentation?
Yes.
Mercy's presentation. She's having issues.
Yes, let me share my screen now.
All right. Okay, good.
Thank you so much, Dizan, for that. And just maybe a precursor, there are some slides that kind of have transition, so I'll just let you know when to click next. All right, so I am just really excited to share my knowledge and experience about energy as a driver for climate action, and I'm eager to learn from you all on the same. I think Vivian has already summed up my role within Mercy Corps very well. But just to add, a lot of my work entails leading initiatives that aim to build evidence on the pivotal role that energy plays in facilitating social economic development in participating communities. So this means a lot of research and evidence building is embedded in my programs, in the programs that I lead. Next, please. Great. So Africa is not on track towards achieving energy access by 2030. I think that is something that I'm sure even Chima has mentioned. Over half of the current population still lacks access to electricity. Even where electricity is available, it is often marred by poor quality and reliable services and prohibitively high prices for people to afford it. To give you a good example, as of 2021, the median price for electricity across Africa was over 30% higher than the world's average. In addition, the clean cooking access is even worse. Over 80% of the population still uses biomass and inefficient stoves to cook. The International Energy Agency, estimates that traditional biomass, mainly wood and charcoal, accounts for about 66% of the total energy consumed in sub-Saharan Africa, which makes the region one of the only one in the world that heavily relies on biomass. Now, all these issues are happening against a background of a rapidly growing population, challenges around the economic and geopolitical environment, and of course, climate change. Next, please. Now, this lack of energy access comes with other effects, socially, economically, and environmentally. Some organizations have attempted to quantify and monetize this effect. So, for example, low capita use of energy has the potential to impede economic growth and therefore cause GDP losses of between 2% to 4%, simply from energy poverty. The use of inefficient stoves paired with biomass and kerosene puts users at a very high risk of chronic diseases. So out of the 3.2 million that the World Health Organization estimates, and out of the 3.2 million deaths that the World Health Organization estimates are attributed to household air pollution each year, 490,000 of these come from sub-Saharan Africa. This challenge falls, of course, disproportionately on women and children, especially girls, who are most actively involved in cooking activities. This not only causes loss in time and productivity, but has a huge price tag connected to health. So the energy deficit not only just affects people's lives directly, but it has wider consequences on the economy. Yet, Africa is uniquely positioned to leapfrog the traditional path of fossil fuel dependency and transition directly to renewable energy solutions due to its abundant renewable energy sources in Africa, such as solar, wind, hydro, geothermal. And let me just thank Chima for recognizing some of the countries in Africa that are actually are ahead of the curve in terms of renewable energy integration. In addition to that, governments, investors, development partners are increasingly gaining interest in diverting investment from fossil fuels to clean energy. The market prices of renewable energy technologies are lowering, and we're starting to see some very interesting innovative financing approaches to supporting renewable energy investments. Next slide, please. But even with all these issues, with all these this progress, why is it that we're still slow in terms of addressing the gap through clean energy transition? One of the main areas, of course, is infrastructure. A lot of our infrastructure in Africa is largely centralized, and we rely a lot, especially for areas that are not yet connected to the grid. We rely a lot on fossil fuels to power our activities, to power industry. And this therefore means there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place to install and maintain clean energy systems, from supply all the way to distribution, such as solar, wind, geothermal, and hydro. And there's also a lack of robust end user infrastructure to utilize clean energy. Do we have the right, are end users well capacitated, or do they have the right infrastructure to actually tap into the clean energy technologies? The second one will be skills and awareness. As with infrastructure, we are still, some of the skills that are present in the industry are quite weak as far as clean energy is concerned. So we need to build our labor force around skills to not only implement clean energy solutions, but also maintain them over time. What happens, for example, in terms of operations and maintenance of solar powered grids in remote areas? What do we do at the end of the line for these? And how do we then ensure that these skills are honed internally within the continent? The third one is, and of course, sorry, and maybe just to add another layer on that, is institutional capacities. Are our local and national governments well capacitated to start thinking about clean energy transitions in their policies, in their development strategies, and as well as their climate action strategies? And the third one is around policy and regulation. So our existing policies and regulations are still really structured around fossil fuels. And I think this also goes back to my point around skills, institutional skills. We need to be able to start thinking about how to change the structures of our policies and our regulations to make it easier for investments into not just clean energy supply, but also manufacturing, R&D, integration, or total integration of clean energy in our national and regional strategies. And then, of course, finally, there is investment. Admittedly, there's been a lot of flow of investment into the clean energy space globally, but it's really a trickle compared to how much we actually need to actually start seeing proper change. So I believe it's the International Energy Agency, or IRENA, that estimates we would require roughly about $15 billion worth of investment into just solar to be able to start seeing some $15 billion of investment, I think, every year to be able to achieve universal access for people by 2030. So when you compare that to roughly about 3.3 that's coming into Africa, then really it's not much. And of course, we also need to start thinking about being innovative in the investments that we make. Most private sector investments, for example, are quite averse to high risk, what they call high risk markets. So these would be low GDP economies that would really struggle with debt or struggle with paying back investments. So private sector tends to to just stay away from them, but perhaps there are ways for us to make this easier by de-risking these investments over time. Next, please. I think I've mentioned quite some bit of this. Apologies for what my presentation looks like. It should be better than that. I apologize for that. But basically, these are some of the areas that what could be done to help address some of these hurdles. I think I've already mentioned financing, but it shouldn't just fall into public or private sector financing. We need to think about improving affordability for these solutions by end users. We need to be able to fund research and development for innovations that are fit for purpose. We also need to think about capacity building, not just for institutions and policymakers, but also for end users, for enterprises to better understand how to build good business and delivery models that reach the right people and help to solve today's sustainable development issues. We also require partnerships. And by partnerships, I think we need to go beyond just the usual partnerships between the public sector and private sector, but can development partners, for example, work together to build on each other's strengths to make it the transition towards clean energy easier and to help with social development through clean energy. Others would be bringing into the fold academia and financing partners so that they better understand the nature of clean energy and its effects and how it would help to support climate action as well as sustainable development, and help just to really spread the word around the potential of clean energy. And then, of course, finally, there is monitoring and learning. We need to continue building evidence through data. There is quite limited data. I know a lot of the data that we're seeing out there is quite, it's high level, but how much do we actually know about these communities, for example? How much do we know about what are the local issues that face specific cities or specific rural areas that are affected differently by climate change? And how can we then use that to build our action research to test innovations, then go back to the industry and share our learnings, our challenges, and of course, learn from failures. But to what extent are we confident that the data we have can help us to develop relevant solutions to today's and tomorrow's issues? Next, please. So now that I have attempted to provide some bit of a bigger picture, I want to move on to the exciting opportunities that improving energy access in Africa could provide. Africa is still relatively young, but that of course presents it with some really good opportunities to be at the forefront of supporting today's sustainable energy agenda. Yeah, just pause there, please. Dizan? No, just go back and pause there first. Yes, thank you. Okay, I just want to start small, looking at the focus of today, which is affordable or energy access for climate action. And I'm going to do this within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, given that this is where we're heading to, or what we're aiming towards by 2030. Now, developing countries with lower GDP capita levels are generally more exposed to climate change. I think Chima mentioned that Africa is responsible for about 33.8% of greenhouse gas emissions, yet the continent bears a huge brunt of the effects of climate change. I think the Notre Dame University's Global Adaptation Index reveals that 7 of the most vulnerable countries to climate shock in the world are in Africa. I'm going to repeat that, 7 out of 10 of the most vulnerable countries to climate shock in the world are in Africa. What this means is that climate change has adverse effects on key areas such as food, water, health, human habitats, ecosystems. And one of the factors that makes them so vulnerable is their reliance, heavy reliance on natural and on natural capital and agriculture. So for example, changing weather patterns could seriously affect the agriculture and food systems in countries such as Gambia, Somalia, Eritrea, Burundi, and the rising levels the rising sea levels, would affect infrastructure in countries such as Mauritania. So Sub-Saharan Africa is home to 27 of the world's 28 poorest countries. And by 2018, I think the average poverty rate was about 41%, which means 2 of every 5 people in Sub-Saharan Africa could barely meet their basic needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, let alone having access to or being able to afford basic services such as healthcare, education, decent jobs. Now, over 470 million of people in Sub-Saharan Africa live in what the Clean Cooking Alliance calls hotspots, where over 50% of wood fuel harvest is unsustainable, which makes Sub-Saharan Africa a region with the highest proportion of people that highly depend on nature for their basic needs. Now, why am I providing this background? It's because while tackling climate change requires collective action, it would be difficult for a parent, for example, who's struggling to feed their children to get behind the phrase about limiting atmospheric temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. They wouldn't even know what to do with that kind of data, right? Their issues are much more imminent. And we're talking about trying to improve climate change in the future, but what about the imminent issues that affect the African of today? The COVID-19 pandemic clearly demonstrated how extremely vulnerable Africans are to dealing with health and economic shocks. So most of them haven't even recovered yet. So even as we're talking about climate change, you can now click design. There are other things to consider. Energy access is instrumental to climate action, but is also a catalyst for sustainable development in general. So when I was asked to speak about energy justice in the wake of COP28 this year, and I deliberated as to what this means in the African context. And I think energy justice is not just about aiming to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions or mitigating global warming. It should also entail reducing existing day-to-day drudgeries that individuals and communities face, which then help them to gradually build resilience against the effects of climate change. So this obviously means providing quality and reliable and affordable energy services, improving food security by implementing energy technologies that reduce post-harvest losses, such as solar irrigation, off-grid powered grain milling, food preservation through cold storage. It also means improving health by promoting clean cooking technologies, powering healthcare in remote areas. It also means electrifying schools and homes, not only to just improve the quality of the education, but also to provide information through ICT. This means reducing the burden of care work that women face daily. The International Development Research Center estimates that women spend 3 times more time on unpaid care work compared to men. And this is usually compounded in areas where there is limited access to services such as electricity, water, healthcare, and information. It also means improving livelihoods by opening up job opportunities for skilled labor in off-grid energy markets, creating local job opportunities for productive use of energy. We are fortunate to be home to more than 400 million youth aged between 15 and 35. These are the futures. These are the leaders of the future, as they say. And energy or transitioning into clean energy provides a very good opportunity to build jobs and skills and therefore employ even more people. So Chima comprehensively outlined the climate change process and its link to energy. And one thing I got from his presentation was that climate change has a compounding effect on other areas of sustainability. So it is not enough to limit our scope of communication to climate action. Let's tell stories of how vulnerable or how vulnerability to the effect of climate change threatens the chance of humans to live decent lives. Let's talk about how it can take up to 10 tons of wood to produce just 1 ton of charcoal, and how if using this, even with knowing that using the biomass for cooking is slowly killing us, that we don't have any other alternative, cheaper options. And to quote the Clean Cooking Alliance, it does not make sense to grow trees unless you address why people are cutting down trees in the first place. Next, please. How much time do I have left, Vivian?
So I'll just want you to stop at 11 on the dot.
Okay.
That's 4 minutes here.
That should be enough for me. Thank you so much. So I know the next question will be, what are these stories that we should tell, or where do we start in telling such stories? Well, organizations such as Mercy Corps have made strides to stay ahead of the curve in putting energy at the heart of development. So just a brief introduction about Mercy Corps and E4I. Many of you might already know Mercy Corps, a global organization supporting humanitarian efforts across 43 countries globally. But then recognizing that energy access plays a key role in bringing lasting change to the to those most affected across the world. Mercy Corps merged with Energy for Impact in 2021. And the way Energy Impact works now is it's an energy platform within Mercy Corps that seeks to bring change through facilitating private sector-led energy access innovations to help today's most pressing development challenges. Next, please. This is going to have this is my last slide. So I will just try and highlight very few examples of how we're implementing energy access for climate action and sustainable development. And just to mention, this is a mere snippet of the work we do, and it barely scratches the surface of what we can do. And we don't do this alone. We do this in partnerships with donors, other development organizations, the public sector, and energy companies that share our vision. I will start with agriculture. About 95% of smallholder farmers in rural Africa rely on rainfall or irrigation, and it leaves them very, very vulnerable to rising temperatures, droughts, changing weather patterns. At the same time, there's a lot of food losses, post-harvest food losses, which therefore affects food security. And by the way we do this is we support farmers to improve their farming practices, to reduce farming post-harvest losses. So, for example, we just concluded a program in Senegal that was aiming to improve the rice value chain by supporting solar-powered grain haulers. And we supported a women-led cooperative in eastern Senegal to improve their rice processing, which then helped them and elevated them so that they were now producing rice just beyond subsistence use and using them for commercial use. Another project we have in Rwanda, it's called solar irrigation in Rwanda, where we're helping farmers to adapt to erratic rain patterns through solar irrigation. So some of the findings we got from there were that farmers could save about $250 in fuel and manual labor per season, and were able to also expand their irrigated areas by 2 hectares. Another program or area where I'm actually quite passionate about is the support that we're providing to refugees and the urban poor. So providing provision of energy for humanitarian settings, for example, has traditionally been short-term or has been just really short-term. But what we're doing now is trying to support the public and private sector to kind of get into this market, to create an enabling environment for market-led solutions. And we also help enterprises, both the SMEs that provide these solutions, but also the micro-entrepreneurs, to build skills around marketing, capital access, local supply of equipment to use these energy solutions. And of course, we do so many other things, such as technical advisory to these SMEs, business mentoring to micro enterprises and other areas. So I would probably just halt there, just to allow for any questions or for others to provide for the next presenter. And I look forward to continuing this conversation further.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mercy. That was such a good presentation. And I like the fact that you were able to highlight some of the places in Africa where you've reached with renewable energy and what's working. And these are some of the stories we can actually take up as journalists to start telling stories of solutions and what's working in communities across Africa. Because like Mercy said, energy justice is not just about, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and transitioning. It should be about getting people who are struggling out of that situation, individuals out of that situation of struggling to get energy access. So let's tell these stories of energy justice across Africa. Thank you so much, Mercy. Thank you. So we're going to just take our last presentation quickly, but I would advise that we start dropping our questions in the chat so we don't take so much time during the question and answer session, so we can just, wrap up at 11:30 on exact. So I'm going to call on Samuel Ajala. Samuel Ajala is an energy journalist, a climate and energy journalist, and who contributes to different local and international media outlets, including the Energy Windy blog and Gas Outlook. Currently, he is co-building Solar 360, a sustainable energy and tech-driven media platform that combines the power of journalism, data, and citizen-driven advocacy to drive active conversation around energy transition in Africa. So please, Samuel, can you do us the honors?
Thank you so much for having me. Let me share my slides.
You're right.
Okay, can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Chima and Mercy for the wonderful presentation. They have been able to give a context to the issues around, energy transition in Africa. I remembered when Chima was talking about a just energy transition. Yeah, I was in an event here in Berlin. That's the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, and there happens to be like a conversation between the president of Ghana and also the Minister of Power, the former Minister of Power for Nigeria, and they were discussing about the fact that we can't be talking about energy transition in Africa when we have our people who are wallowing in abject poverty, where we have issues, around insecurity, where we have issues around, energy access. And, the major discussion was that, okay, the global north has been able to use coal, has been able to use oil and gas to develop their economy. And it's actually time for, Africa also to, use oil and gas to ensure that our economy is developed. And with that, we can be able to transition easily, from fossil fuel. And it's actually an interesting conversation. Even as a journalist, reporting around energy transition, basically in Africa, how to ensure that one is able to give, a balanced reporting around the whole energy transition. My hope is, at the end of this presentation, I'll be able to, want everybody to the overview of energy transition, the importance of effective reporting, the key elements, the reporting challenges and solution, and highlighting success stories and the best practices for reporting, considering engaging the audience and also impact of effective reporting. So when we look at the overview of energy transition, we need to understand the fact that Africa is a continent that is rich in land, water, and energy resources, with a young and fast-growing population. And already the world's youngest continent, and is expected to grow to nearly 2.5 billion people by 2050, and 80% of them, who will be residing in sub-Saharan Africa. And also considering the level of women and economic development, how it differs widely across the continent. And it's also clear that the opportunity, Africa, offers is actually vast. And we also need to understand that energy plays a fundamental role in Africa's development pathway, and at the same time in improving livelihood and access to opportunities, which is crucially, dependent on, how people are able to access reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy. And this is also in view of the expected, vast impact of climate change on the African continent. Africa actually contributes less to carbon emission, and the continent suffers greatly from the effect of climate change. And it's something that is really disheartening. And because in this context, we also need to talk about the enormous potential for industrial development, for job creation, and environmental management, that needs to be spread across to access to sustainable energy sources, when it comes to energy transition in the African context. Now, looking at electrification rate of Africa, you get to understand that the electrification rate is actually 46%. And as of 2019, 570 million people, were still without access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa, while only about 60% had access to clean cooking. I would say basically even Nigeria as a country at the moment is actually also suffering from energy crisis, and currently about 86 million out of over 200 million population in Nigeria are actually without access to electricity. And this is the worst globally. And this also shows that there's really an issue around energy crisis in Africa. And so when you also talk about issues around energy crisis, and poverty, we need to consider the socioeconomic inequalities and how it also impeds progress, in widening access to basic health service, education, modern machinery, and also technology. And we also know basically that Africa also holds significant energy resources, and fossil fuel represent around 40% of African exports, and with countries such as Algeria, Angola, Chad, Nigeria, and Sudan being highly dependent on, on oil and gas as the main source of their revenue. And by contrast, renewable energy also offers Africa economics prospect for economic growth, for cost-effective technologies, to expand energy access, and also ensure that there is industrial development along new value chains. Considering the substantial and local job creation potential. Yeah, because we cannot be talking about energy transition in Africa, and we are not considering what are how do we actually close the gap when it comes to energy transition, in the sense that how do we ensure that people who are employed as a result of their work in the oil and gas sector do not become jobless. How do we ensure that people who are in local communities all over Africa are able to to access a sustainable energy? Because we can't be having conversation around sustainable energy and neglecting the fact that the realities of socioeconomic progress or development is actually at stake. Yeah, because you can't be talking to somebody about energy transition and the person has not eaten for the past 7 days. So how do you expect that kind of person to actually understand the need for them to transition to a clean form of energy? I think I'm able to talk about the current energy landscape, and previous speakers have also been able to give context to that. So let me just go directly to renewable energy finance in Africa, because this is actually, I think, is actually one of the key issues that we're actually having in Africa that is actually impeding our transition to sustainable energy. So a report was released by International Renewable Energy Association and Climate Policy Initiative. A report was released recently, and based on the reports, the report stated that despite the fact that Africa actually has an enormous potential and needs when it comes to energy, Africa received only 2% of global renewable energy finance, and that is equivalent to about $60 billion out of the 2.8 trillion of finance that was invested globally between 2000 and 2022. And because of this, there's a conversation around how do we ensure that renewable energy cash is actually equitably distributed between the global north and the global south. Yeah, because you can't be telling Africa, or you can't be telling developing economy to actually transition to a clean form of energy. And even in a renewable energy finance market report that we have seen shows that there's an issue with distribution. Yeah, because Africa actually receive the lowest investment when it comes to renewable energy finance. And based on my experience of reporting on energy transition, I'm talking to experts in Nigeria, talking to experts in Ghana and some other African countries. They've been able to emphasize the fact that for Africa to actually transition to clean energy, there is a need for funding and investment. There's a need for funding and investment. Just in Nigeria alone, the government said that for us to achieve energy transition, that it's going to cost about $1 trillion. In Ghana alone, to achieve energy transition, it's going to cost about $562 billion. Even in Africa, according to reports, Africa actually needs about $100 billion annually to achieve energy transition. And so how do you tell a country that has other socioeconomic development issues to transition to a clean form of energy when these issues are there, they are lying, and there is no even form of proper support coming? Because for Africa to actually transition to a clean form of energy, like what Chima said, a lot of African leaders have said they need aid. They need aid. And even in 2015, looking at the amount that was invested in renewable energy per person in Europe and North America, you discover that it was 22 times greater than what was invested in sub-Saharan Africa. And look, in 2021, the European investment per person was actually 127 times more than sub-Saharan Africa and 179 times higher in North America. So there's no equal distribution of the renewable energy finance. And how then do we say that Africa is going to be able to achieve, energy transition when the distribution is not even equal at all? So what is the importance of effective reporting as journalists? Because effective reporting is actually crucial for energy transition in Africa. That is because it can actually help us to raise awareness, of the need for energy transition and also the benefit of renewable energy. Two, it can also help us to highlight the need for accurate, unbiased, and comprehensive reports. So, as a journalist, when we are reporting issues around energy transition, we need to ensure that our report is accurate, is unbiased, and it's actually a comprehensive report that actually details all the issues around what we are working on. And we also understand the fact that as journalists, our work basically is to ensure that we inform the public, about the progress of energy transition projects, going on in Africa. And aside from that, we also have a role to ensure that we hold government and businesses accountable for their commitment to energy transition. Just recently, the Dangote refinery was actually launched in Nigeria, and there were actually some issues around the environmental impact assessment of the project. Considering the fact that Nigeria has made several pledges, towards reducing carbon emission, and even just after I think COP27, the former government, that's the former president, announced, an oil exploration in the northern part of Nigeria, and the country is still making commitments that, okay, we are committed to energy transition. And, what is happening in reality in the country is not really showing that, the country is really, really serious about energy transition. How do we ensure that, governments are able to walk the talk when it comes to energy transition? That it's not just a matter of them appearing on, international platforms, giving speeches around energy transition, trying to get funding and support for it. But in reality, what is happening on ground in our country, is actually contrasting to what they are saying. And lastly, there's also a need to promote innovation in the energy sector. There's a need because if we are going to advance energy transition in Africa, basically, there's a need for innovation. There's a need for innovation, and that comes to when you talk about technical expertise, when you talk about innovation development in terms of people coming up with innovative ideas on how they can be able to solve the issues around energy transition, energy crisis in Africa. And as journalists, it's also our duty to ensure that some of these innovative solutions that are happening around the African continent, that we're able to tell the story properly, to understand what is working and what is not working, and how we can ensure that going forward some of these issues are going to be addressed. Key element of effective reporting. As a journalist, always reporting on climate and energy, it's important that when you're doing your reports, you need to get accurate data collection and analysis. Yeah, you are not just reporting from the point that you don't have accurate information and analysis, because you need to ensure that you are able to present your reports in a way that it actually captures the reality of what is happening on ground, when it comes to energy transition, basically in Africa. And you also need to collaborate with experts and stakeholders. Yeah, I think one thing I find interesting about this is that one of the things that has helped me so far when it comes to reporting climate and energy transition in Africa is the fact that, I've been able to maintain a cordial relationship with experts and stakeholders in the field. That when I want to work on any aspect of energy transition or energy, basically, I can be able to talk to an expert first, to share my story idea with the experts and see how I can be able to come up with a comprehensive report that is, accurate and also has, a good analysis. We need to also focus on local perspective and solutions. Like I said, I think later on in the slides, I'm going to be talking about that. And you also need to emphasize the importance of storytelling and human interest angle. That's very important. I think last year I did a report around how a particular community, I think in Benue State, how the energy crisis is actually affecting the health sector, in the sense that, how women in local communities who want to give birth actually experience energy poverty, in the sense that basic health centers in Nigeria, or let me say even generally in Africa, have issues when it comes to electricity. Yeah, because an health center is supposed to be powered with electricity 24/7. But what happens in the case of rural communities, where some of them have not, they've not even had anything called energy access for the past 20-25 years. So how does this affect the work that is being done in the healthcare, in terms of when they want to deliver, like how do we ensure that there's lights, in terms of when it comes to vaccine, how do we ensure that there's proper storage for vaccine, and all these consideration. So that tells that there's a need for us to also ensure that when we are telling our stories, that we are able to tell our stories based on human interest angles, and not just based on hearsay and all. Now, what are the challenges?
Samuel, sorry, could you please wrap up in like say a minute? We are out of time and would want to have time for the questions and answer session.
Okay.
So yeah, just finish up with this slide and then thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think let me just move on to highlighting the success stories. As journalists, in as much as we are trying to tell stories around an energy transition, we must also realize that we don't need to also focus on just the negative side all the time. Yeah, because we have amazing innovations, who are trying to drive energy transition in Africa. I think last year I actually did a story, about a particular company. Yeah, I think a youth led company in Lagos. And so what they are doing is actually amazing, because they're actually using solar power to address the issue around food waste, hunger, and emission all at once. And based on what they are doing, they are working with key stakeholders in the community to ensure that food is preserved. And how are they doing that? They are using solar power, to actually do this. And this shows that a lot of amazing innovations and solutions are actually ongoing in Africa. And there's a need for us to to keep telling more stories around what is being done, and what can be done to improve what they are doing, and all. So let me also talk about engaging the audience before I wrap up. So as journalists also, we need to ensure that when we are telling our stories, we are able to actually engage with our audience. I was telling somebody some days ago that when it comes to conversation around climate change and energy transition, people find them very interesting. So people find them very boring, to be honest, because some people believe that everything is just filled with climate jargons and terms that that they do not really understand. So how do we ensure that as journalists we are able to actually communicate our stories in such a way that our audience can be able to understand the story we are trying to tell? And this we also mean that we might need to engage visuals, infographics. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think there's an issue with your mic. Can you check? Or is it from my end? Can you hear him properly? Lizanne?
Yes, no, it
There's
sounds
some kind of noise.
yes, distorted.
His mic, yes.
Is this too?
It should be fine now. It was because someone else unmuted themselves.
Oh.
Samuel, you can continue.
Yeah.
Okay. So like I was saying, it's also our duty to ensure that we actually communicate conversation around energy transition in a way that our audience can be able to relate to the story we are trying to tell them. And this might actually involve engaging visuals, infographics, and multimedia. And this might also mean that to actually reach a wider audience, you might have to maybe do a sort of social media campaign, citizen journalism to ensure that, audiences are able to, understand issues around energy transition, in a way that even a layman can be able to understand the story you are trying to tell him. Because, energy transition conversation is actually, it's boring. Yeah, it can be boring at times. And also, it can appear as a jargon to some people who don't even understand, what energy transition is all about. So it's just our duty to ensure that we communicate effectively to our audiences. And when you are communicating to them, you need to ensure that your reporting actually, fosters dialogue and also inclusivity, in the sense that you need to respect people's perspective, and also you need to look for a way to create opportunities for meaningful engagement, that can be able to contribute to a more inclusive and also informed discussion when it comes to Africa's energy transition. So I think I will just stop here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samuel. That was such a great presentation, and I'm sure that a lot of journalists here will have so much information to take home on how to go about reporting energy transition. For me, I know now that we need to create more awareness. We need to talk about innovations. We need to talk about solutions of what's working. So I hope we can really take something out of this webinar, a lot actually out of this webinar, to do more stories on Africa's energy transition. Okay, now, so we're going to move to the question and answer session. I've just seen one question in the chat, and sorry, Mercy, a lot of people in the chat are also asking for your contact details. I don't know if you'd be kind to share with us so I can share with them later on. So we have someone saying, okay, we have someone saying, what could be an ideal sustainable energy mix for the African continent, given the current climate dispensation? I think that question would go to Chima Moneke.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I'm trying to see the name of the person that sent that question.
Classic.
Okay, that's fine. So this is how I will respond to that question. There is no hard and fast rule to fixing energy mix for Africa or for any other country. So for Africa in specific, I think the best way to go about this is for every country to look inwards on their resources and then develop at their own pace. So, for example, Kenya is very good with geothermal, and they've used it to a great extent. Nigeria, we have gas. Okay, if the agreement is that we shouldn't use gas, that gas emits CO2. Now the question is, what alternative do we have? Looking at the fact that there is no adequate financing to move to renewable straight ahead, right? Now, if you delay the use of gas, what is going to happen? That people are still going to use diesel, which is even more polluting than gas. So we consider gas in Nigeria as a transition fuel. It doesn't mean that that's the final bus stop. It can be a transition fuel. Then from gas, we cannot transition fully into renewable energy. So every country should look inwards at what works for them and then transition at their own pace. Energy transition does not have to be discussed exclusively without economic progress or economic opportunity. So they have to be discussed, together. People need to survive before they can be able to talk about energy transition. And that is the point. So there's no hard and fast rule to fixing energy mix for any country. Every country should look inward and develop at their own pace, looking at the resources and the quickest means of transitioning. The quickest means for transitioning in Nigeria might be different from somebody who is in Egypt or who is in South Africa. So it's specific to every country, and that's how I want to respond to that. If anybody can contribute, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I think Abdul Hamid's hands have been up. Please, can you unmute and ask your question?
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. This is Abdulhamid Tahir Hamid. I'm the CEO of Global Environmental and Climate Conservation Initiative. What I'm going to add here is that I know that some of the challenges that our journalists are facing is lack of awareness on the issue of energy and also the climate change in most of the African countries. As the measure that we took it last year, we organized a series of events with these journalists for them to be informing, to be aware of all the energy transition that's available and the climate change issue. But our major challenge now is sustainability. How we can sustain this kind of program by enlightening, gather our journalists, inform them what is the current affairs on the issue of energy and climate change. So maybe I wanted us to come together or to bring an idea that we can sustain this project to be reaching all these journalists across the state or across the African countries. Thank you very much.
All right, Abdulhamid. I'm guessing that's not necessarily a question, but what you think we can do better. So I think I'll take Sharon's question. What measures can be put in place to protect the most vulnerable to fossil fuel price volatility? Example, oil and gas. And to reduce, the question is not complete, but I think I would love Mercy to take this. What measures can we put in place to protect the most vulnerable to fossil fuel price volatility?
Yeah, that's a really good question, considering fossil fuel price elasticity crosses, it kind of crosses so many people, or it affects everyone in general. So one way to do that, and maybe something that we have considered, we have tested before, is considering social protection, bringing in energy access as part of social protection interventions. What this means is providing things such as cash transfers, or conditional or unconditional, that could potentially cushion vulnerable communities and vulnerable individuals against the price volatility of fuels. However, this would obviously need to come with some additional layer of support. So we shouldn't just stop at social security, but also helping them transition into, out of vulnerability. So rather than just helping them to simply cope, these social security interventions need to also look into adaptation and thriving in the wake of such economic volatility. And one way to do that is to improve or to help local businesses, for example, or help people leverage the use of these fuels, or even the use of energy to generate income. Helping them understand the importance of the savings that come with being able to use energy productively, and therefore, transitioning away from just simply coping. And that would really, really help them in the long run. I don't know if I've responded adequately to your question, but that's one of the areas that I see. Thank you. Vivian, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so thank you, Mercy. I'm trying for us to finish in the next 3 minutes. I hope that's possible because we're already above time. I'm going to take Bernard's question and say, how could Africa use natural capital or renewable resources as a means of disaster management and preparedness? Please, who wants to go for this?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
How could Africa use natural capital or renewable resources as a means of disaster management and preparedness?
Whew. Wow. These are really interesting questions. I can go first, and I would welcome others to also take over. I would probably discuss this in the context of clean cooking, because I think here is where there has been quite a lot of link. There's been a link between clean cooking being a nature-based kind of solution. So one way to do that would be, first of all, leveraging sustainable, let me just call it sustainable, harvesting of natural resources to support clean cooking. We obviously know that, for example, a lot of communities will not be able to fully transition out of using biomass for cooking. They will still continue using the usual charcoal or fuel or wood stoves that we use. But could this potentially be leveraged to improve how we harvest natural resources? A good example will be where we are working with several companies, or I'm aware of different organizations that are working with several companies to incentivize them to support communities to reduce the use of fuel or wood fuel in the communities. And this is by tapping into the carbon market. So there have been certain carbon credit solutions that have come up that allow companies to invest in, of course, improved cook stoves, but that the condition should be that that also comes with an increased rate of reforestation, for example. So it's like taking back the investment into reforesting land areas. Other areas would be around, for example, supporting communities to come up with better ways to incorporate or to utilize rangelands for livestock. There are some innovative solutions that could happen there, but of course, it all depends on innovations in financing and community skill in intervention or community-led interventions.
All right, thank you so much, Mercy. I don't think we can take more questions, or maybe we can just take one more, which is Janet, and her hand has been up. So just one more and we are done, please. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the contacts of the speakers. So if you have questions or further discussions, you can always reach them directly. Janet, please go ahead.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you, team. I just wanted to express my gratitude, first of all, for this opportunity, especially for myself. I'm all the way from South Africa, and I'm currently busy with my postgraduate program, and it's exactly about this. I just wanted to know exactly how do we apply, because I saw in regards to the application, we need to send some sort of a video or a writing piece. I didn't quite understand how that is supposed to be done, but I do know that the due date is on the 2nd of August. If anyone can just explain either here or maybe by means of an email, since we don't have enough time left, how exactly do we apply so that we can qualify for I think it's top 4 people who will be chosen for the climate tracker activity. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Janet. I think that just, builds into what I want to say already. I was going to give that information at the end of this webinar. And since we're at the end of the webinar, I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. The participation was high from the beginning to the end. Everybody found the conversation engaging, and I'm happy we could draw some value from this webinar. So the COP28 Africa opportunity is currently ongoing. So I'm going to share the link for the opportunity in the chat. So basically, we're looking for 4 African journalists who can join us in Dubai this year, 2 in person and 2 virtually. So Climate Tracker, I was a Climate Tracker fellow last year, and I traveled with Climate Tracker to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And I can tell you that this is a great opportunity, whether in person or virtually. You're going to gain a lot. You learn a lot from this opportunity to travel to cover COP28. So for now, we're looking for 4 fellows, and you need to write a story. We're looking for nuanced and compelling stories about energy transition in Africa, and that is why we're having these webinars. It's actually a 2-part webinar. This is the first one, and we're having another one next week, Monday, and the link is in the web post, which I've just pasted in the chat. So you can, from these conversations, generate story ideas. From Samuel's presentation, from Mercy's presentation, from Chima's presentation, we could see stories. I'm sure a lot of us are already thinking about stories that we can do going forward. So Climate Tracker wants you to do a story between now and August 2nd. Actually, the deadline is August 3rd, not August 2nd. But at least we should have gotten your story by August 2nd. So you're supposed to write like a story on energy transition. And in the web post, you're going to see some of the examples of the kind of stories we're looking for. We're looking for stories of maybe how reliant is your national electricity grid to fossil fuels. What are the impacts of fossil fuels in your local communities? You know, how families who work in fossil fuel extraction are going to feel about the energy transition. You know, how eventually are they going to be able to survive when we actually transition? How probably a community in your country is using renewable energy, you know, to is relying on renewable energy, more like the resilience of a community in your country. You can also look at the expansion of oil and gas in our country, in African countries, despite, you know, the transition pledges and all. So it could be on the local, it could be on the national, it could be on the continental basis. What we want are stories that actually, you know, tell the story of Africa and how Africa is transitioning and, you know, journeying through this transition path. You know, we're not looking for advocacy pieces or op-eds. We're not interested in stories you've published like last year, last 2 years. We want a story that you published within this period now till August 2nd. We're not interested in pieces that address general climate change issues. You know, we want specifically energy transition. We're also not interested in oversimplified pieces. And so we're interested in stories that, you know, interesting stories with real research and multiple sources. So I'm sure that if you go to the link in the chat, you would get more information about the fellowship. And we're really looking forward to reviewing your applications. We're already getting good applications so far, and we are excited to review our applications and, you know, to have you join us at COP28 in Dubai. I'm gonna do something else because one thing I noticed that during the presentations, a lot of things that one thing that was being mentioned is the issue of data. Data is actually an issue when we want to report climate change. But I'm gonna do two things. One is to drop a link in the chat to Earth Journalism's data compilation, and also another link of climate experts in the global south. So I'm sure these resources can be useful to you in your reporting. And I'll definitely add more to the slides that I'm going to share later on after this. So I've dropped two links in the chat, three links in the chat, one for the COP28 African Opportunity, one for data by Edge Journalism Network, and the other for climate experts from the Global South. So I'm sure this would definitely be useful for your reporting. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming in. I think Design also dropped the link in the chat. Please help us share on social media. We've been tweeting about this event, about this webinar. Please help us share, tag Climate Tracker, you know, tag the speakers. You're going to see their social media handles on the posts. You can tag them, you can follow them, and you can reach out to them. And definitely, I'm sure they'll be very happy to respond to your questions. We are going to share all of the presentation slides that were presented here today with you today or tomorrow. But then you definitely get it. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming in. Design.